Welcome to the Parasol Pulse. I'm your host, Ashley Oliver, Group Sales Director at Parasol. Joining me today, we have MD from WTT, Reese, and we also have co-founder from SafeRec, Sebastian, and our one and only Chris Bloor, our Compliance Director at Parasol. Today, we're going to delve into the details that are impacting the recruitment supply chain and contractor payroll sector. As we're understanding more around the umbrella regs and the draft legislation, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into some of the hot topics surrounding that, starting with some of the terminology and jargon that is coming out and what does that actually mean. So starting with JSL, joint and several liability, that's the direction of travel at the moment. But coming over to you, Reese, can you explain a little bit more what is JSL and how does it actually work?
For sure, yep. Joint and severally liable, or joint and several liability, is an application of a collection mechanism. So we're talking about PAYE here, right? So we're talking about HMRC's use of collection of PAYE under the PAYE regulations, which is ultimately what HMRC does, or the use of the collection for HMRC to collect the taxes. And the joint and several liability nature means that more than one entity is liable for that collection, and HMRC can go after more than one entity. Before the draft legislation, or certainly before April 26, when the draft legislation is anticipated to come into effect, the umbrella company is the primary liable party for the collection of tax. Joint and severally liable expands that to other entities in the supply chain. And so we're looking now at HMRC's ability to collect tax on more than one entity, which is where they're really looking to try and stamp out tax avoidance in that supply chain through that mechanism.
So when we're talking about JSL and we're talking about obviously that can go to a different party, a lot of the terminology in the draft legislation reverts to who's the relevant party. Mm-hmm. Who is the relevant party?
Well, the relevant party is different under different circumstances, right? So we've got in the kind of primary case, it's going to be the agency that's closest to the end client. That's where HMRC are going to look to recover any loss of tax or any underpayment of tax as arising from that contingent supply chain. Where there isn't an agency in the supply chain, or that agency is offshore, and I think we're going to talk about this perhaps later on in the podcast, where there is connected parties, where the agency and the umbrella are connected, then that's going to look to shift up to the end client. So HMRC are always going to look to have more than one target for the collection of tax. And I think those relevant parties and the nature of connected parties and purported umbrellas is what we're really going to look to delve into today, and how people can be preparing to create a level of transparency in that supply chain.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you just referenced there purported umbrella. Mm-hmm. What is a purported umbrella versus what we would traditionally call a standard umbrella?
Yeah, sure. I think the purported umbrella is, if we look back at the use of tax avoidance, talking about EBTs, loan schemes, typically loan schemes really operating in the supply chain, what's typically happened there's been a UK front. It's a UK front to the umbrella. It claims to employ the workers. It claims to do all of the timesheet billing, all of the PAYE management, the payment to HMRC. Claims to give all the same employment rights to the workers, but it never actually did that. The money flows through. Fees are deducted along the way, but the reality is it ends up in a trust company in the Isle of Man making loans, or there's an umbrella that's based in the Isle of Man or further afield. And so HMRC are looking to attack that channel. And so what they're trying to do is say, well, where there is a provision where the agency above or the end client reasonably thought that work was happening at that UK company, but it wasn't actually happening, it was happening offshore, that everything is then focused into that agency. And so the ported umbrella looks at where it was reasonable for HMRC and the rest of the supply chain to assume that things were happening at that level. And then it applies the same joint and several liable principles.
So in a nutshell, if you look like, you act like, and you're behaving like an umbrella provider, or you're putting it to the outside world that you're an umbrella provider, you're going to be caught by this, as in terms of the relevant party will be caught by it. So this will capture things, loan schemes, but it will also capture mini umbrella and all of those different disguised remuneration type models out there.
Exactly right.
Ah, okay, interesting. Well, thank you for clarifying that. So moving on, I think one of the things I'm finding fascinating, we've been talking a lot about in the sector, is quite clear cut where you've got end client, agency, umbrella provider, that in that scenario, the relevant party is the recruitment agency in that situation. But when you have a wider supply chain, where you have an MSP in play, where you have a consultancy in play or neutral vendor, then that liability, the relevant party, changes. So can you explain a little bit more about how that works and a little bit more what MSP providers are likely to do on the back of this?
Sure. I think that this is what is very interesting with this draft legislation and the direction that HMRC took with joint and several liability, and we said that very clearly, which is the relevant party is going to be the parties that have the contract with the end clients. And when there is an MSP in the chain, well, it's going to be the MSP. Obviously, the reality with MSP is like if they use second tier agency, they don't have the direct relationship with the umbrella company. So it's going to be very interesting to see what's happening and what they are doing. There is a few solutions. I think that based on the conversation that we have with the MSP following the draft legislation, is absolutely clear that they're going to be a lot more due diligence from MSP in terms of understanding not only the recruitment agencies they're working with, but also which umbrella company the recruitment agency they're working with are working with. It's a very complicated sentence to say for a French guy, but this is what happened. So I think that there is a few model in place. I think that there is a few talk about margin only. I don't really see how that is going to be very viable for the recruitment agency and for the second tier recruitment agency in the supply chain. And fundamentally, MSP, their main purpose is to find labor for the end clients. And I think that everything needs to be compliant, but the main purpose is to find labor, and for that they need second tier agency. So that is model that is talked about, but it's going to be very interesting if it happens in practice and how it works. What I believe is going to happen is MSP will effectively, one, have stronger due diligence processes in place to really understand the umbrella companies that their agency are using, and potentially enforcing a PSL down the supply chain, which basically is saying, this is the umbrella companies that we vetted, this is the umbrella companies that we are comfortable with, this is the umbrella companies that you have to use. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. If you're an MSP and you have like all this recruitment agency and this, from April 2026, this huge liability, I'm pretty sure that this is where it's going to go.
Yeah, I think me and Chris, we've had a number of conversations now with MSPs as well as neutral vendors, and actually the kind of what you just said is what they're looking to do: reduce PSLs with trusted partners, looking to use some form of basic checking tool such as SafeRec, and then managing and enforcing that PSL down the supply chain. The challenge they've got, that they're coming back to and explaining to me and Chris, is how do they actually monitor that? How do they actually get visibility and transparency across that supply chain? So it's all well and good going, this is our PSL, this is how we want you to operate supply chain. But then they need to make sure and check that is actually happening. So how do you foresee that happening today?
Absolutely. I think this is one of the main problem when you have supply chain, which is like, how do you see and how do you enforce what's happening in your supply chain 2 or 3 levels down? And I think that the answer to that is going to be nothing else than technology. This is a part that we have in SafeRec. So about 3 weeks ago, we launched a platform for MSP where effectively MSP can log in and they literally can connect with the recruitment agency in their supply chain. It's entirely free for the MSP and for the recruitment agency, and they have visibility effectively on the recruitment agency, which umbrella companies that they engage, and therefore following, if they use SafeRec certified umbrella company, having the guarantees that taxes for their work have been accurately calculated, disclosed to HMRC and paid to HMRC.
Okay, so with using your tool, Obviously, that gives them the visibility. But what does your tool actually do to help make sure and give the MSP and the agency and also the contractors, the umbrella providers, are using that kind of reassurance that things are actually being done correctly, i.e. the correct PAY and NICs is actually being paid to HMRC?
Sure. So that is basically, we refer back here to what we do with the certification for umbrella company and the entire compliance frameworks that we have in place. And you have effectively 5 layers of protection. The first layer of protection is the review that WTT is doing on each umbrella company, where they're going to review deep pretty much everything that's being done by the umbrella company, from company structure, company ownership, contract, processes, policies, insurances, pretty much everything that is that constitutes the legal reviews that they are doing on the umbrella company. The second part of it is we have a technology that effectively audit payslip in real time directly from the payroll software that the umbrella company is using. We cross this payslip with RTI sent to HMRC that we also get in real time from the payroll software. And every single month, we meet with umbrella company and we log with them under the HMRC tax account, where we can see the amount of tax that have been disclosed to HMRC and if it's been paid. And following that, and that's the last part, and a few people know that, but we also have a 5th layer of protection, which is a contract that we have with umbrella company. And when an umbrella company sign up to become SafeRec certified, in the contract, they agree that if they're being found to be non-compliant through the organization that is SafeRec certified or through any associated company, we remove the certification and we have the right to send an email to all the historic and current clients, letting them know that they lost the certification and why. So all of that altogether create a very comprehensive framework, from the legal review, tax compliance with the real-time auditing, and obviously contractually, or if you are tax avoidance companies that pay 10,000 people, you effectively take the risk if you try to become SafeRec certified, that basically you are going to be exposed and kill your business. So this entire compliance framework is what effectively is happening with the SafeRec certification. Now, because we have the SafeRec certification and we audit everything, every single payslip is linked with the recruitment agency, and our platform link recruitment agency with the MSP platform. So MSPs that use SafeRec, and again, the solution is free for MSP and free for agency, they really have visibility on what's happening in their supply chain, and the guarantees that the umbrella companies that are using their supply chain are effectively compliant. Taxes have been accurately calculated and paid to HMRC, meaning they can effectively keep doing what they're doing, which is being an MSP.
Okay.
I think, sorry, Ash, on that point, there's one key thing that you missed out, and that's the 3-hour grilling that you get from WTT, which I don't think is well known in the marketplace. I think it's just, they have a look at some paperwork and then you move to the next step, but it isn't. And it's very easy to submit paperwork and make it look how it should do, but you've also got this conversation with experts who are going to ask the questions and come away and then write this report that then goes to SafeRec as well. So that's a key point, I think, that's not a lot of people know about as well.
Yeah, so coming on to that, so Reece, me and Chris, part of our bid team, our compliance team, we're literally every week we're filling in requests for information from agencies, end clients and MSPs around what we do and how we do things. And it's literally a paperwork tick box, stock answer, you put it in there. But our reality is that, when we're talking to the agencies that we're providing these to, they don't really understand the questions that they're asking, because they've downloaded some compliance questionnaire from some form and they're going, do you know what? I've done my due diligence because I've got a bit of paper that a provider has said we do everything correctly. Now, ultimately, anything any provider is putting on there, you can put whatever you want down on there. Now, also, if you're a non-compliant umbrella provider or purported umbrella provider, you're clearly going to put the information down that shows that you're compliant, albeit that you're not. So coming back to WTT and obviously the work that you do in conjunction with SafeRec, what's the difference in terms of what you do from an agency just completing a standard RFI process?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate in that we've been operating in the tax investigations field for 10 years now, specific focus on the recruitment sector and the contingent labour umbrella market. So we have big archives of tax avoidance mechanisms, tax avoidance structures, directors involved, connected parties, the agencies. We know the agencies that use them. We know the end clients that use them. We know the agencies that some instances forced their workers to use them. We have a lot of information, which has been gathered from the best part of 3,500 contractor clients who have all been or all have fallen foul from loan schemes. And what you typically see is that there's fairly consistently a lot of parallels in the companies. They start up, they close down, they start up, they close down. And you will always find mapping across those companies for individual directors. So a lot of the information, as Chris says, we do grill, and we make no bones about that. Our whole job is to protect the supply chain, and we're very alive to that. And I think Seb will say that people have been rejected. I think it's important that that is the case, because we, as I say, we've represented individual clients who've been badly affected by tax avoidance for so long, and we have a real passion for making sure that transparency, or the increase in transparency in the supply chain, really does stick around. And I think it's important for umbrellas who have been unfairly tarnished with the brush of tax avoidance in the past. So we work hard to identify that. But apart from the grilling, apart from the documentation, there's a lot that happens in the background that neither the umbrella will see necessarily, only Saferec as our client will ever really see it, is the background checking of directors, the background links from our data set, the mystery shopping that goes on a continuous basis. And if it's there, we will tend to find it. So I think typically tax avoidance structurers have created documentation to give this perception of compliance and have felt very confident in doing that. I think with our experience on tax investigations and our understanding of that market, and our understanding of fairly bespoke, complex structures from the past, and we're talking kind of, we've worked on cases from dating back to 1999 and afterwards. I think they can be significantly less confident that they can bypass that with some artificially created documentation anymore. So there's a lot that happens below the surface, and that's typically, if I'm honest, where we find out where the non-compliance is happening. We'll find it from our own archives, from our own data, and from just extracting information and tying it across to documentation, as opposed to what's been said in the interview, and those two things not really tallying up. And then the team will go deeper and deeper and deeper. So yeah, there's a lot that happens.
A lot more. You do a lot behind the scenes.
There is.
It's just an interesting point on the mystery shop stuff, because that's something that I've done in years gone by, where you're aware, so you're on a PSL and you're aware that something's awry, and you make up a little narrative and you contact them, and initially you get the genuine spiel, and then you drop in that you've been speaking to so and so, and that, they will very quickly just pivot and go, oh right, so what we need to do is we're going to send you this paperwork, but you can't give this to your agency. We're going to give you another pack that you give to your agency and another contract, etc. Give them that, and then they'll be fine.
Yeah.
And then also examples of where they've said, the agency knows about us, okay, so they won't let you, so you need to move to another agency on the PSL, and they'll let you because we work with them, basically. And you only find out by asking the questions, I suppose, don't you?
Yeah, I agree. I think probably one of the benefits that we have outside of that, perhaps, and we do that, is that we have worked very hard on behalf of a large population of individual contractors for a long time, for 10 years now. And we have a very loyal client base, which we're very grateful for, but we treat in kind in terms of offering our time out for free to just help them. Mm-hmm. And those contractors are equally aggrieved with tax avoidance operating and where they found themselves as a result of that, and are very quick to pass on information.
Yeah.
So we can start to see that yes, we might have archives from information gathered over years of inquiry, but we are constantly sent new information about new schemes. And so with a population, let's say we've got 3,500 individual clients, of whom at least 2,000 are still in the contracting market, still operating in the contracting market, are still being marketed to all the time, whether that's through these kind of comparison websites that you see with full of tax avoidance structures, or they're through other means.
They have like brokers, don't they?
They're
I remember speaking to one. It was quite clear that they were just sat in a coffee shop somewhere.
Yeah,
exactly. Here, the cups in the background, and they're talking you through the options, and they say, "Well, we could put you with this one, but you might be better off going over here.
Yeah,
we'll get those to call you back." And then you said, "Well, can I ring that?" No, they'll ring you basically.
And there are tried and true methods for tax avoidance to proliferate through the market through marketing mechanisms. As long as you know those, you can find where to look.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. There's nothing reinventive about tax avoidance structures and how they operate. They have deep relationships with certain entities, and they use those. And that's what they've built over a number of years. The reality is that can't continue. It has been allowed to proliferate by well, let's be honest, HMRC have done a lot, but not enough to stop that. And they've certainly not done enough in time to protect individuals from that activity. But there's nothing new about the way tax avoidance is operating. They're simple structures that are just rinse and repeat. Yes, you have the introduction of mini umbrellas, and then you have the advancement of mini umbrellas in terms of conglomerates around the purchasing of those and bringing the credits back on shore. There's all sorts of changes to the way the structure operates, but at its core, the marketing structure and the links and the way it's put into the market is always going to stay the same. And so, as you say, if you know where to look, then you'll find it quite quickly.
So expanding on all of that, when we're talking about what good looks like, due diligence, etc., I think when we look at any sector, any industry, you've always got your good operators and you've got your bad operators.
Yeah.
Whether it be in the umbrella payroll world, or we've got in the recruitment supply chain, etc. Now, my time will tell me, and I think Chris will probably agree with this, and as with you guys, most agencies want to do the right thing, and also it's like in any sector, it's the bad operators that bring everyone down. So we have conversations with agencies literally day in, day out about legislation, compliance, what good looks like. But when you're talking to agencies or those in the supply chain MSPs, what advice do you give them in terms of what due diligence do they need to do, and what things that they should be looking at from a contracts perspective, also using a SafeRec payslip checking facility and all the other work that you do behind the scenes on WTT? What would your advice be to now a recruitment owner comes to you and goes, how do I actually go about making sure that my supply chain of umbrella providers is actually working as it should be?
Yeah, I think it's something that's not often talked about, because we talk about the agency as a whole, but the agency is made up of lots of individuals, right? It's made up of very ambitious individuals who, without applying a broad brush across the market, who are financially motivated. I think that's a kind of general perception of the recruitment sector, and I think the recruitment sector generally own that as well. I think that, so you have the kind of senior leadership team, then you'll have the management team, then you'll have individual recruiters underneath who are largely commission driven. Where we've seen tax avoidance take place in the past is where there is a clear PSL, there is an ASL, but the PSL and ASL is not being monitored particularly, or there's no transparency in the workers. So what you've got is a couple of, let's call them rogue recruiters, who are putting workers through these umbrella models. And so if you pick up recruitment businesses that have a large number of contingent workers going through their books, and you've got 2 or 3 recruiters within that business that are putting people onto this umbrella that they don't understand. Let's be honest, they don't understand it. It's not necessarily a deliberate move from them, but someone has come to them through a different way and said, well, we'll pay X pounds into your bank account every time you make a referral. These people will listen. They will. They don't understand the effect of what they're doing. All they're being told is that we're entirely compliant. We're making sure the worker earns more money, and everything's fine with HMRC. And the recruitment businesses the individuals within the recruitment businesses will accept that. The tax avoidance structures have had very effective salespeople for a long time, and if they're motivated by financial gain or commissions driven off the back of that, then that will happen. And so you only have to start approaching a number of recruitment businesses and have a small number of recruiters within those businesses to actually get some real traction on passing these workers off to enhanced umbrellas. Again, they have a conversation we have clients who are social workers. They have a conversation with a social worker as an example, and they say, well, you could earn X here, or I know this really good umbrella, good mates with them, been working with them for a long time, but you get a 5-10% hike on your take home. They're going to go with it. And I don't think there's been enough awareness put out there. We see all these spotlight articles from HMRC, but I don't know many people who aren't in the industry in some sort of professional capacity that are reading spotlight articles, and certainly not individual taxpayers.
Yeah.
And so they don't understand it. They can't access that information. It's not being conveyed to them in a simple enough way. So if they're being told by the person that is finding them work, who they trust to find them work regularly, who they've built a relationship up with them, if they go to them and they say that you can earn more money if you do this, they're going to do it. And so that's been a frustration. So very long-winded answer to your question, I appreciate, but I would say look internally first. Start internally. Start making sure that your team understand and provide some training. Make sure your team understand why the PSL is there, why it's protecting workers, why it's protecting the business fundamentally. And Seb has a fantastic matrix which shows the scale of the tax liability that increases just off a small number of workers. And that is a risk, and that is a risk that you are now inviting into your own business as a result. So I'd say look internally. I'd then say when you're moving externally, the natural thing that's going to happen is that everyone's going to condense down their PSL to something that they're comfortable with, or something that they're told they're comfortable with, or something that someone advised them they're comfortable with. I think the right answer there is something that you're comfortable with. The due diligence has to be taken place now internally. Joint and several liability is a strict provision. There's no kind of get out clause here. You're not saying, well, I did my due diligence, I checked the supply chain, and therefore I'm not liable. It's if tax arises, you're paying it. And so the due diligence has to happen to an extent now that you know that no tax is missing, that there's no tax leakage. It's not enough just to make assumptions or be told by someone else that no tax is being leaked. You have to see, or you have to be able to see the evidence for yourself. And I think that's important when we were talking earlier about transparency all the way down the supply chain. If you're a tier 1, then you've got to look tier 2, tier 3. You've got to understand who tier 3 is working with. And as Seb says, the only way that you're really going to get that is through technology. Your compliance teams can be spending weeks and weeks and weeks asking information. The ones who are compliant will come back to you fairly quickly. You'll be asking for months from the tax avoidance one. So you need to draw a line in the sand. You need to make sure that you're working with an effective technology partner to increase transparency in that supply chain, like SafeRec. You need to then actually engage with that documentation, not just put it in a drawer and not worry about it. Be making sure that you're comfortable that all of your workers are accounted for on that list, that they're not going off to some other place through the agency, through the tier 2 agency, making sure that all of your workers are accounted for from that list, and then making sure that the correct application of tax has been paid from reports like SafeRec. It makes it easy, but I would say that it's happened when off payroll came in. Everyone still got frustrated because they've got new compliance to get used to. This is BAU. This cannot be anything else anymore. And I've been saying it for years and years and years to kind of get the compliance right. but this has to just be something that you just observe as another process that you're in there, because it's too important to overlook now.
And I want to echo what we said, because coming back to what you were saying, Ashley, I think that you have recruitment agencies that responding to liability. And I think that a lot of recruitment agencies have been doing due diligence following the Criminal Finances Act. And the reason why they were doing due diligence, because, well, if you have reasonable processes in place to prevent the facilitation of tax evasion, then kind of fine. And what you were mentioning earlier is exactly what's happening, where you have a due diligence process. It's kind of like, most of the time is a bit of a tick box exercise. You ask this question, you get this document, and you put that in a folder on your computer, and you kind of save, or you can say that you check some things. And to echo what Rhys said, this is where the game is changing now, because that doesn't matter anymore. So the entire behavior that we have from recruitment agency, not all of them, there is quite a lot of recruitment agencies that are already doing really thorough due diligence because they care about the supply chain and who they're engaging with. But there is also a lot of recruitment agencies that treat due diligence as a tick box exercise. And the problem, and I'm sure we're going to talk about merger and acquisition after, but the impact on keep doing what I've been doing for the past 5 years is going to happen, is going to affect their business, and is also going to affect the exit if they want one in the next 5-10 years. And an exit for a recruitment owner, it's just what they work toward. It's the biggest payday of their life. And I think it's absolutely essential that they really look at their PSL of umbrella company, and they really and truly understand what they are doing. So the due diligence process that, okay, I'm going to get that and ask this question, and I'm relatively comfortable with what happened, that won't be enough anymore. They really need to understand the document that they are getting, and they really need to understand the technologies they are going to use, because they will have to use it. And this is what we have at the moment. When you have organizations that represent hundreds of millions of pounds in their supply chain, they do due diligence on us, and that's absolutely fair enough. And I think this is what recruitment agencies need to do. They need to understand the umbrella company, and they need to understand in the details exactly if they have an accreditation or if they are self-rec certified, and it's something we welcome, to really do due diligence in terms of like, what do you do exactly? We need to understand how do you make sure that we don't have any liability, and we need to understand your process in details. And obviously, this is something that need to happen. Obviously, is time that recruitment agency will take away from what they want to do, which is effectively placing worker and growing.
So Seb, can you expand a little bit more on due diligence and what good looks like?
Yeah, sure. So I think that what is very important for recruitment agency and for MSP, and really is the only thing that should matter, is have taxes been paid to HMRC. It's not about due diligence. It's not about contract. It's not about payslip. It's not about RTI. And it's not about have RTI been sent to HMRC. It's about have taxes been paid to HMRC. And I think something we see quite a lot when we audit payslip, when recruitment agency drag and drop payslip, for an example, in the platform. And what we see is, and that is very important to understand, is it's not because you have a payslip that you have an RTI. It's not because you have an RTI that the RTI have been sent to HMRC, and it's not because a RTI has been sent to HMRC that taxes has been paid. And I think the only thing that matter now from April 2026 for pretty much the entire supply chain and MSP and end clients, if they engage umbrella company directly, it's about have taxes being paid to HMRC. So it's not about having a thorough due diligence processes in place, it's having this confirmation that they don't have tax liability.
So how does that happen then? How can you be sure that an umbrella provider isn't manipulating the data down the supply chain for the due diligence process to what they are actually paying to HMRC?
Well, there is not a lot of way to be sure, and obviously I'm going to speak about self-rec a bit too much, but this is exactly what we do, and this is the reason why we created these processes, and the fact that we don't get the data from the umbrella company. And this is really what was missing when I worked in recruitment, which You always have this logic with traditional accreditation, or when recruitment agency are doing due diligence on umbrella company, is that everything that they get from the umbrella company is documents provided by the umbrella company itself. And when you do that, you kind of make the assumption that the umbrella is honest enough to provide the right document, which obviously doesn't happen if they are dishonest. So you have these things that just doesn't quite work. So to answer your question, what we do is that we don't get payslip and RTI from the umbrella company. We get that from the third-party payroll software. We have partners, great partners, and they build SafeRec integration into their payroll software. And what happened and what we requested from them, and this is something that is very unique about SafeRec, which is when the umbrella company use the payroll software to issue a payslip, PO or umbrella, or a CIS statement to a worker, we receive in real time the actual payslip sent to the worker and the RTI sent to HMRC. And that was really important for us to get the information that the payroll software issue by default. We didn't go to see the payroll software and say, hey, can we have this type of data in this format? We say, we want exactly what is sent to the worker and exactly what is sent to HMRC, and this is what we are going to audit. Now, the question is still, how do we make sure that taxes have been paid to HMRC? And the only way you can do that is really to reconcile the totality of payslip and CIS statements that have been processed by the umbrella company with all RTI, with the figures on the HMRC tax account of the umbrella company and if it's being paid. So I know that part of the process at the moment, you got some recruitment agencies that ask umbrella company, hey, can you give me a screenshot of your HMRC tax account to make sure that taxes have been paid? And maybe they're going to have some reassurance, but the reality is that they have absolutely no guarantees that the amount paid by the umbrella company is actually the taxes for their workers. So really the only way to have this level of certainty is to do exactly what we do at SafeRec, which is audit absolutely everything, the entire payroll, cross-reference with RTI and cross-reference with the HMRC tax account of the umbrella company to make sure that you have a match. And what is really important about what we do is, obviously, if we just do that and we are not transparent about it, well, kind of live in the world where the umbrella company can say everything's fine. So in our process, every single week, we send a copy of the payslip audit report directly to the worker. So today, there is over 50,000 people every week that get a report from us, which is their payslip audit report, showing that everything is compliant. And once we reconcile absolutely everything and we got the guarantees that taxes have been paid to HMRC, we send to every single recruitment agency. Today is over 8,500 recruitment agency every single month that gets a report per umbrella company showing that taxes have been, one, accurately calculated on payslip, two, accurately disclosed to HMRC via RTI, and three, accurately paid to HMRC on the HMRC tax account, meaning zero tax liability to the agency, to their worker, to their client or their client's client.
So Seb, just on that point, because that's a question I've been asked about 4 or 5 times this week, is that the agency wanting to, and you might have already answered this, but it's really important to double down, I think, is that the agency wanting to understand that their proportion of the liability has been paid. And I think what you're saying there is, you're doing everyone 100%, and that's how I've responded. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
The only way of knowing is that we could probably give you a report in terms of what the liability is, but you need to be certain that the whole of the liability has been paid, and that's something that you'll deliver to them to show what the liability was and that it's been paid.
Absolutely, this is exactly that, because you live in a world that where you engage with the umbrella company and you want to check the organization that you work with, you can't get confirmation that everything's fine from them. It just doesn't quite work.
Bonkers, isn't it, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's complicated because obviously I worked like nearly 10 years in recruitment and before 2017, it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
You can't. And this is where technology provide to the supply chain and to recruitment agency is now you can have this level of certainty in 2025 that you couldn't have in 2017 or even 2020.
We said on the last podcast, didn't we? We said, if this was 10 years ago, we would struggle. We wouldn't get there. It's the fact that we've got this software now that can do this, that facilitates that. And, one of the points I say is if anyone isn't wanting to engage in this type of process, that's got to be a red flag in the first instance, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the question, I think, for a recruitment agency, and I can remember my time in a recruitment agency in a board meeting, and I can imagine myself when like if I was still there in 2025, and I think that the question is just like, why would we work with organizations that don't want to prove to us that taxes have been paid to HMRC? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So let's start working, and only work with the one that can give us this level of reassurance.
Yeah. Go back to the point I said before as well, because I've said it for years, those businesses supplying false documentation, it would be very easy, particularly now with AI, to knock up the 5 pay slips and a corresponding RTI to send to an agency. And that will be done in maybe 30 seconds. Yeah. And, any agency that's relying on that really is putting themselves at huge risk, aren't they?
And we've seen it, haven't we? We've seen umbrellas even falsifying SafeRec certification.
Yes.
Umbrella documentation, just saying that they're SafeRec certified and sending it on to agencies, which is why it's probably a health warning to mention that SafeRec obviously maintains a updated list of certified umbrellas on the website, so worth checking. But it's as much as technology advances to allow us to increase transparency and awareness, so too does technology to outsmart them. And I think that's something that we've got to be alive to, definitely, which is why the process has been, and certainly the case of Seb, the process has been built from the ground up to try and be as infallible as possible, and not rely on the supply of information other than kind of originating source information that can't be manipulated.
Yeah.
I think that's the right way to do it.
I'd agree. You touched on it before, the Criminal Finance Act, and though we're talking today mostly around the umbrella regulations, JSL, and what that all means to the supply chain, but there is a plethora of kind of legislation already out there to try and tackle tax avoidance, basically criminal finance. You've got the onshore and offshore intermediaries legislation, onshore around the false self-employment, which impacts CIS and sole traders. You've got TAR. How's that all going to play into it now? So are they now defunct, or is it all just about the umbrella regulations when we're talking about the contractor payroll sector, or do these other pieces of legislation still play a part in the future landscape?
Well, if we go back to what I was saying just before, I think that what drives behavior is liability. And while this legislation is still going to be there, I think that the joint and several liability that's going to come in play in April 2026 is just so huge and so big that in terms of your recruitment agency and you need to do something, I think is you are going to do something because of the joint and several liability from April 2026. There is scenario today where you have a similar effect to the joint and several liability. You talked about the offshore intermediary legislation. Well, recruitment agency have tax liability, but it's only in a very specific scenario where there is an offshore entity that engage a worker. Now, with joint and several liability, all of that doesn't matter. There is no scenario where it's applicable. Is you engage an organization that even look like an umbrella company, if they don't pay taxes, liability is on you, Mr. Recruitment Agency. And I think that is so powerful that every single organization, MSP, recruitment agency, and client, they are going to act based on this legislation. But it's also important to say that these legislation are still live. So you take the Criminal Finance Act, for an example. Well, recruitment agency, MSP, and clients still need to have processes in place to prevent the facilitation of tax evasion. It's not going away. It's not like, okay, we have a new shiny toy and everything else like go in the bin. These legislation are still there. And I think that is an opportunity for recruitment agency and supply chain to really understand their supply chain, to really understand the umbrella companies that they have, how the worker are being engaged, and effectively having measure to protect their business against the new legislation and also the previous one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd add to that enforcement has always been an issue for HMRC. I think they get new tools every year. They don't necessarily know the kind of clarity of how to interpret that into their provision or their processes, because let's be honest, it's a big organization with a big remit, and it's a hard organization to manage and police the industry of the market, the UK as a whole. I think enforcement is what's going to be different about this new legislation. That ability to go after people just on a strict liability basis without any opportunity for clarification, or really any need for inquiry work or long processes drawn out for HMRC to work up inquiries over a number of years, then reach closure notice, reach conclusion. That's going to be much easier for HMRC. So where we have some Section 44 legislation, it's still going to be utilised, and we see that being utilised very effectively and broadly in the construction industry at the moment, with HMRC looking at whether or not the classification of self-employed people is correct, and whether actually there are agency workers that should be deemed employees under a number of different industries. That will still continue, and HMRC are utilising that. But I think where they'll really be able to be more effective about enforcement and policing that market is through that application of a strict liability, because Section 44 requires HMRC to send an inquiry, to understand the workforce, to spend months and months understanding each determination of those, the supply chain, what entities are working in there. That documentation takes a long time, and it could be 4 years down the track before you're even kind of concluding an inquiry and sending out a closure notice, in which case the business might have sold, or things have moved on, or some of the entities have closed down. Here, we can be talking about that delay, but we might not be talking about that level of delay. What it means is tax is underpaid, tax is not paid, determination goes out, and that strict liability and enforcement on an actual amount of money that is due from the agency. There's no inquiry process, there's no management over that. This is due, pay it.
And my understanding is they're going to do this via what's called a Regulation 80.
Yeah.
What is that, and how does it actually work in practice?
Yeah, we're making the obvious and legitimate assumption that it's going to be Reg 80, because the draft legislation makes amendments to Reg 80 determination, or the legislation under Reg 80. Reg 80 is HMRC's tool for collection of underpaid PAYE, PAYE only, I should add. They have made it clear that they're going to amend Social Security's legislation to incorporate national insurance contributions at a later date. We don't know when that will be, but for now, the Regulation 80 focuses only on PAYE, underpayment PAYE. And the Reg 80, the normal time limits for issuing a Regulation 80 determination are 4 years from the end of the corresponding tax year. So let's take now the 24-25 tax year. HMRC would have up until the end of 5th of April 2029 to make an assessment, which doesn't mean it needs to be delivered by then. They need to have made internally, the Regulation 80 needs to have been issued by that date. So if we look at that, that's the normal assessing time limits. Then there are extended time limits to 6 and 12 years, where there's offshore activity, as an example, which is very common in the tax avoidance space, see it regularly, or where there's careless behaviour, as an example. I would expect HMRC to be pretty hot on the non-payment of PAYE from an umbrella. We're not really talking about Reg 80 determinations arising off the back of years of inquiries. We're talking about HMRC identifying non-payment of PAYE that it thought was due, and then issuing a determination. They issue the determination. Let's assume they issue it within the 4-year normal assessing window. They issue that determination. That determination will have an actual figure for tax on. No more are we going to get this, we believe that you may have been subject to tax avoidance. It's going to have an actual figure on. That actual figure will say the amount of underpaid PAYE. And it needs to be a best judgment. HMRC's best judgment does not need to be the exact figure, does not need to be, in some instances, anywhere near close to the exact figure. I've seen some hideous regulated determinations, hugely overvalued. It needs to be HMRC's best judgment at the time. The Regulation 80 then is appealable. So an agency that receives it can appeal it within 30 days. Has to be appealed. If it gets to the end of the 30-day window, then that determination stands and the tax is due. And there's nothing else anyone can do about it.
What happens if whoever gets that Regulation 80, whether that be the agency, the MSP, or the end client, you go through the appeal process, assuming that's what they're likely to do. Mm-hmm. Comes to the end of the appeal, that's it. You've got to pay. What actually happens then?
Well, then you're into more in-depth tax collection mechanisms. So let's say they appeal, question mark on what grounds. There have to be legitimate grounds to appeal a Regulation 80 determination. If you've got joint and several liability and you're in that supply chain and tax hasn't been paid, it's difficult to understand what basis of appeal is going to be, but there will be inventive ways, I'm sure, to extend that window for payment. HMRC, if the crystallization of that tax liability happens after that 30-day window or the later of that 30-day window or the conclusion of an appeal, then the assessment stands and tax needs to be paid. You're then into collection. Okay, so you're outside of the normal tax inquiry stage. You're into collection mechanisms. HMRC are then in debt management and banking, and they will work that up. People will arrive at your premises, and then you're into county court proceedings for collection of tax. The Reg 80 is also able, so without wanting to go too much in depth, PAYE regulations, principally, the tax is a responsibility of the individual worker. It's the collection of the tax through the PAYE regulations that the responsibility of the employer. And so the worker is actually primarily liable for the tax, but the collection is done through the employer. So a Reg 80 determination can actually be turned into a Reg 81 determination, which transfers the liability onto the individual worker for collection of tax as well. There needs to be specific circumstances for that to happen. I would say that the worker probably has more likelihood of a successful appeal against a Reg 81. Reg 81 is really where the employee knew that tax wasn't being deducted, had real awareness that they were engaging in a tax avoidance scheme. So when we were speaking about earlier, where the worker will have a preference over the vehicle they choose to use, or the worker will come to the recruiter and say, I want to work through this one, and it will be okay, you'll get a kickback, everything will be fine. The reality is that needs to stop, because that's where the problem lies, and that Reg 81 transfer away from a corporate entity means that actually HMRC can feasibly now, through the Reg 80 process, go after pretty much everyone in that supply chain. So they have lots of enforcement opportunities now. Sure. So yeah, it was good to see in the draft legislation that extension of the Reg 80s as the collection mechanism. It shows what their real intention is on how they're actually going to enforce it, which has been the bit that's, I think, been missing for a lot of years.
I think that's really interesting, talking about the Regulation 81, because I think with JSL and Reg 80s, I think there's been the assumption by some that, this is a get out of jail card for contractors, the employee, the worker that's going for the scheme. It's not. You can still be by court and have to pay tax if you knowingly knew that you were going for a tax avoidance scheme. So best advice from an agency perspective or an end client MSP is ultimately don't get a Regulation 80 in the first and foremost. And best way to do that is making sure you're doing your due diligence across the whole supply chain. Now, moving on from that, Chris, you are speaking pretty much day in, day out now to business owners, compliance directors, agencies that manage the PSL and the supply chain. What feedback are they giving to you in terms of their reaction to this legislation and with what they're going to actually do? Obviously, we're advising what they should be doing, but what are their behaviours looking like they're going to go through?
I think as it stands at the moment, we have got a number that understand it. but want further technical detail in and around MSPs that we talked about before. And they're trying to say, well, how can I move myself away from the risk in that respect? I've had conversations in and around in the same arena about a distillation of their PSL, to make sure that they're only working with providers. Lots of questions about how they can carry out due diligence and what they should be doing. It's always kind of flunked me over the years that you have some agencies, quite large agencies, that will send you literally a one-pager for 3 questions maybe, and to say that you'll indemnify them and they're happy with that. But I think there's certainly a nervousness around this, and that's probably my concern, is that we're saying that the things that you can do, but if they really want just to move away from that, there's decisions that they could make with their clients that we saw with regards to I-35 as well. So the onus is on us as an industry to provide that reassurance and to make sure that we're working with the right people to provide that advice to, they don't get into that situation of a Reg 80. And ultimately, what do we do in the next, we've probably only got 8 months now, let's say, to get that. My concern is that, yes, we're having conversations. Yes, there's nervousness, but when do they start to take action? What I mean? You talk about pre-existing legislation, Criminal Finance Act that's in place. Things that aren't being talked about is that where they have worked knowingly with these providers, with the Criminal Finance Act, there's actually a duty for them to report, that they're aware of this now, because they are. Are they going to do that? Probably not. So that they're wanting us to give them all the answers, but they've also got to deal with some of their actions over the years themselves as well. And, the larger agencies seem to be a bit more prepared. The SMEs, I suppose, one of the things that they're missing, I think it's really important to kind of put out this conversation, is, there was a propensity just to perhaps take that risk. And the fact that, we're not necessarily on the hook, the worker will be on the hook, and, we'll push it away. For those agencies that, they've set up and they're looking to perhaps exit in the next couple of years, and you mentioned there 4 years, 6 years, 12 years, even if it's not imminent, they need to understand their impact. So, I mean, you probably know a lot bit more about this than me, but what if someone is looking to sell, what does that look like on their balance sheet, I suppose?
Yeah, I think it's the balance sheet and it's the due diligence process, right? So let's say acquire a purchaser who wants to consolidate umbrellas into one big recruitment will appoint us, will look to identify wrongdoing in the supply chain, either to add tax indemnities and wider indemnities into the share purchase agreement, or will look to ultimately try and force the sale price down.
Mm-hmm.
When we're talking about tax risk, we're talking about huge liabilities arising through ultimately events that you didn't see. They're blind spots. And unfortunately, those blind spots just cannot be blind spots anymore. Before, with the liability being on the umbrella, and then there's some, as you say, failure to prevent legislation, POTAS legislation, promoted tax avoidance schemes legislation. There's lots of legislation. We're starting to see some enforceability now, albeit quite late. It's not really been a problem too much. It is, and it's still a potential problem that's looming for a lot of recruitment businesses. But that joint and several liability nature is what really changes the landscape on mergers and acquisitions. If we now identify through due diligence process, and again, using tools like SafeRec, you can identify those supply chains very quickly, very easily, very transparently. You can identify the players, the directors, the people involved, and you can quickly find issues where workers have been paid to tax avoidance vehicles. No purchase is going to touch them.
Yeah.
And in a market where consolidation is naturally going to be an event, with tier two agencies providing too much opaqueness to be used in the supply chain, then the value of that recruitment agency is wiped off, completely wiped off. And as soon as that starts getting around the market, any savvy purchaser who's going to acquire businesses for a decent valuation, is going to put some money in the pot, is going to do that work. They just are. There's too much risk that's inviting on the transfer of that liability onto their business in the future if they acquire through a share purchase. You might see some asset purchase where businesses start buying books of clients rather than buying the business and then letting the business go off to the side. But that's not where you're going to get the value.
Yeah.
The value is on the business. And if there is real liability, real tangible liability that should be on the balance sheet, that's not recognized on the balance sheet, but that you identify, then that deal is not going through.
To echo what Rhys said as well, I think that it's important to understand that when you are a recruiter, a recruitment owner, recruitment agency owner, and you want to sell your business, you can make your business more profitable within a couple of years, and after it's done. Here is very important. It's not something that you can get sorted or you can start preparing in 3 or 4 years' time. It's something that you need to plan in the future. So if you are looking at really selling your business at some point within the next 4, 5, 6, 10 years, you really need to think about the umbrella companies that you're engaged in tax liability that you're potentially going to have and that's going to reduce the value of your business. Obviously, in most cases in the UK, it's going to be 4 years, as Reed said, but it can go up to 12 if there is any offshore organization. So it's super important that the recruitment agency owners that listen to us right now, that effectively want to sell their business, get the biggest payday of their life in 5, 6, 7 years, really start looking at their supply chain and make the right decision and work with organizations that can prove to them that taxes are paid to HMRC.
I agree. That's the contra to my point. You decrease the price, but for the recruitment businesses that are decreasing their price by allowing non-compliant operations to take place in the supply chain, there's lots of business to take from them for compliant ones. So you increase your commerciality through compliance. Compliance-led selling is now becoming a thing. About time, absolutely. That process allows you to take the business from the agencies that are going to get left behind. Mm-hmm. And so, as Seb said, more business, more clients is more value. And if it's all wrapped up in a very nice compliant vehicle, that is be very clear from acquirers that I know in the market, that is a very valuable proposition right now.
So I think one thing that's quite interesting in Chapter 11, the new chapter that's been introduced to obviously capture umbrella regulations, is Clause 61Z. And in that clause, it talks about obviously relevant parties, etc. And within that, it's where an agency, and we've talked about it, is connected to an umbrella provider. That liability ultimately shifts back up to the end client. But what is a connected umbrella? What does that actually mean? Can you share and give some examples of what that would actually look like within the supply chain today?
Well, I think that in the legislation, they're pretty clear about what that means. And that means that you are an agency and you have like a certain percentage of ownership into the umbrella company. And by definition, when that happens, and I think that this is very clear what HMRC want to do with joint and several liability, is that they can have effectively two parties where they can go and get the money if taxes are not paid. And obviously that doesn't work if you got the umbrella and the agencies that are the same party. So what the draft legislation is saying is pretty simple, which is if the recruitment agency have any type of connection with the umbrella company, well, therefore the relevant party is not the recruitment agency anymore, but it's going to be the end client. And I think that is just very important because there is over the time a lot of recruitment agencies that wanted to create their own umbrella company. And obviously the question here is going to be, is it going to be allowed in the supply chain that we live in that effectively will be able to pay our worker through our umbrella company? But obviously that is just hypothesis, we'll see exactly what's happened within the next few months and few years.
Yeah. So I suppose you can imagine if you're an end client and obviously you're doing your due diligence around supply chain, making sure the agencies you're working with are working with compliant umbrella providers. If they find there's a connected umbrella in there, behaviours may change, i.e. the end client may dictate, we don't want you to be engaging with or working with a connected umbrella. It has to be a separate entity down the supply chain. Because ultimately end clients don't want to pick up that liability, but they would do in that situation.
Yeah, possibly. Or they could, for an example, enforce organization that are SafeRec certified, where they got visibility that taxes are paid to HMRC and therefore accept this risk because they are comfortable of what's being done. So and this is what I say all the time, is that the recruitment industry is one industry, but an industry that worked in every single industry. So there is a lot of different end clients. There is a lot of knowledge and understanding and education toward compliance depending on the industry. So I think that it's going to be interesting how the end clients respond to that, but I'm pretty certain you're not going to have one type of response. So I'm pretty sure we're going to still see umbrella companies that are owned by a recruitment agency being out there. I don't think it's going to go away, and it's just going to be interesting to see in which industries that exist, if you see what I mean, and what type of end client are happy to take the risk and the one that are not happy to take the risk, etc., etc.
Yeah, so it's an educational thing, isn't it? Some might not even be aware. This whole thing has been purported that it's the end client's not really on the hook unless they're working directly with an umbrella company. There's also question marks about where they are. There isn't even an umbrella company in the chain. As an example, if it's just an agency and an end client and those people, the workers are employed, effectively the legislation is saying that they would be liable. There has been a recent question that's come up in terms of what employed means, though. Is that a contract of employment, or is the simple fact that a limb worker who's having tax and national insurance deducted, are they caught by this as well? What's your view on that?
It's the deemed employment provisions. I mean, I think... Yeah, I think that's and ultimately that's where Section 44 comes in as well, is looking at the deemed employment of workers who are not classed as employees, and we haven't got time for it today, but looking into the Employment Rights Bill and the impact that it will have on that side of things is going to be a whole world of change in itself as well. So I think there's going to be some adjustments to the supply chain when we see how things land in terms of the draft legislation being properly finalised. I think we're going to see some more clarity around the contractual provisions, indemnity.
Is it the ERB you're talking about?
No, in terms of into the current draft legislation. I think people will start to make changes now, but I don't think those real substantive changes will be made until the legislation is properly finalised. Mm-hmm. And then I think we're going to see some change in behaviours around whether or not we're actually employing people or what we're actually doing, and how those contract for services documents work and the structure of contractual provisions. I think that's going to be a big change.
Yeah. And I think that is important to say about the draft legislation, that at the moment we've got the draft legislation, the policy paper, notes, explanatory notes on the draft legislation, but there is no operational guidance in terms of what HMRC is going to do and how it's going to work. And I think that when we're going to have that, I think is going to effectively answer a lot of questions that people have in terms of okay, operationally, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah.
So at the moment we have we probably see 70% of the picture, but there is still a big chunk that we will have the answer to in a few months.
Real quick one then. Talking about behaviour, something I've been seeing from conversations I've been having with agencies is what they're going to do. And I think a lot of bigger, larger agencies and SMEs already have a great process in place. So for many agencies, this is not a huge movement away from what they're doing today. One thing I've seen is most recruitment agencies are looking to have that trusted PSL, maybe excluding an ASL, but a shorter PSL. They're kind of asking, I need to make sure I have an accreditation, i.e. the umbrella provider has an accreditation, such as SSA. The other part we're hearing is obviously I now need to make sure as a minimum requirement we have a pay slipping checking tool in there, such as SafeRec, but also that kind of transparency down the supply chain. So making sure we can see that transparency. But another thing they're talking about is indemnities and what that looks like, and insurance. Can you expand on that bit briefly in terms of what indemnities and insurance policies we think agencies and MSPs are going to look for?
Yeah, I think that we have this talk as well, and there is really two options. You got indemnity and insurance, and what the best solution. Actually, you got a conversation like on Monday with one big MSP talking about like what's better, and then indemnity or insurance. I think that on the indemnity bit, I think that is going to provide some type of reassurance to recruitment agencies. But the reality is the amount of money that the umbrella company is processing and paying to HMRC is just so huge that the problem with indemnity is the recruitment agency is going to have the same problem, which is, am I working with an umbrella company that's happy to accept indemnities and really mean it? Pretty like large organization, or am I going to the umbrella companies that are accepting it is actually like effectively an organization that if there is any problems, they're just going to shut down and reopen like that happened, because obviously the indemnity is like a link to the existence of the organization that signed the contract. I really do believe that the future is insurance. Like there are conversations that have been happening on the back of obviously the SafeRec certification. I have no doubt something that is going to come to market within the next few months, and that's going to provide really recruitment agency with a real insurance product that will protect them if the umbrella company is doing something wrong.
Chris, also we talked a lot today about umbrella regulations, the things that agencies and MSPs should be doing around due diligence, etc. But is there anything that we can do at Parasol to support our agency and our end client partners in terms of the information and how to go about doing that?
Well, as you know, we've been having countless conversations, webinars, conversations with Seb, etc. We've collated all of that into our knowledge hub on our website. So if you go in there, they'll be recorded. Obviously, you might be seeing it here, but there's lots of details, and we've got a rolling FAQs. So as we're getting questions from agencies that we think are important that need to be confirmed, we're adding and updating those basically on an ongoing basis.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Seb. Thanks, Reese.
Thank you.
With pleasure.